now. So yesterday we finished the sugya of Orla. So let's just recap what we're talking about because it's going to be very relevant today. We were looking for a makar that Chametz is Assur B'Hanaa min Torah. Chizkiah said it says lo yeyachel. Instead of using a classic term of lo yeyachel, it shouldn't eat chametz. It says lo yeyachel. It shouldn't be eaten. Rashi told us that what's significant of the lo yeyachel, it's mashma. Not you shouldn't be able to. Never mind directly eat chametz, but you shouldn't be able to do anything with chametz that could even indirectly lead to you eating, which would make it Assur B'Hanaa. Because if I sold it, or if I did anything else with it, indirectly, you can use that money to buy food with. That's what Chizkiah said. Rabbi Vo said, anytime it uses any lashon of achila, it automatically, by default, includes an Assur B'Hanaa. And he knows that from Nevela. Because by Nevela, the Torah had to specify, it said don't eat Nevela, and didn't Torah specify, but you're allowed to sell it. Why is there any reason for the Torah to tell us you're allowed to sell it if we know you're allowed to sell it? Because lo yochel only means Isser Achila. So it must be that lo yochel means an Isser B'Hanaa as well. And anywhere else in the Torah where it says lo yochel, it means an Isser B'Hanaa. But by Nevela, the Torah specifically made an exclusion and said that here you're allowed to sell it. However, that was the way Reb Meir understood the Psukim of Nevela. Rabbi Yehuda understood that the Torah, when it told us that you're allowed to sell Nevela, the Torah was trying to tell us a specific message, that selling is done to a goy, and Nesina is done to a ger. So therefore, we don't have any more a special expression in the Torah to tell you that Nevela is mutar b'achila, that is mutar b'hanah. The Torah was never trying to tell us that. The Torah was trying to tell us that you're only allowed to sell to a goy and gift to a ger. So we don't have the Torah telling us special anywhere by Nevela that it's mutar b'hanah. So that could not be a source. Nevela could not be a source for the fact that lo yochel automatically includes an Isser B'Hanaa. So the way Rabbi Vo understood it, Rabbi Yehuda would have to have another makar to teach us that whenever the Torah uses an expression of lo yochel, it automatically means an Isser B'Hanaa. And he found that by Treifa. It says by Treifa, it says ubasa basar the Treifa lo sechelu, and then it says la kelav tashlichun oisai. The basar Treifa, you're allowed to throw to a dog. But any other place in the Torah where it says an expression of lo yochel or any type of Isser Achila, you would not be able to throw it to your dog. In other words, it would not be mutar b'Hanaa. Those are the three options of where we know. The three options of where we know that there's an Isser Achila and an Isser B'Hanaa by Chametz. According to Rabbi Vo, it says lo yeyachel. According to Rabbi Vo, according to Rabbi Meir, you see it from Nevela, from the fact that the Torah by Nevela had to say that you're allowed to sell it. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Vo, it's the fact that it says by Treifa, only Treifa one might be able to give to a dog and have benefit from, but any other time the Torah says lo yochel, it also means an Isser B'Hanaa. Now, the problem is, if you learn the Isser B'Hanaa either from the Nevela or from the lo yeyachel, like Chizkiah or Reb Meir would, what would you do with that extra word oisai? So the Gemara tells us that extra word oisai would be used to tell you that chulin shenishchatu ba'azara is Assur D'Oraisa. And Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, who doesn't have that extra oisai, he would have to learn that chulin shenishchatu ba'azara is not D'Oraisa, and therefore you don't need a pasuk to tell you that it's Assur B'Hanaa. So this arrangement will be relevant to understand the end of the Gemara today. Because at the end of the Gemara today, we know what's Assur B'Achila, and we know it's Assur B'Hanaa. And there doesn't seem to be an argument between Chizkiah or Rabbi Vo, Rabbi Yehuda, or Rabbi Meir of what's Assur B'Hanaa. So at the end of the day, even though, according to Rabbi Vo, every lo yochel means Isser Hana, except for when the Torah says not. Well, basically, we're going to go through all these different cases in the Torah where it uses Loyoichal, and in each case there's an exception why there's no Isser Hana here. So at the end of the day, there's going to be most of the cases where it says Loyoichal will be Mutter B'Hana because they have a special limud to tell you that they're Mutter B'Hana, like by Nevela. And the only places that we're going to find that there's no Isser Hana, that there is a Isser Hana, where the Torah didn't remove that, will be Pesach, where there's an Isser Hana, and there'll be Shar Niskal. But everywhere else in the Torah where it says Lo Yochel, it comes with the exception, with the exclusion that over there it would be Mutter B'Hana.
Wouldn't it have been more logical to say that it's Mutter B'Hana except for these two cases?
Right, that's what I'm trying to highlight. In 90% of the cases where it says Lo Yochel is an exception to the rule.
Right.
Because there's a special limud there. And the Gemara is going to also want to understand today, since they all agree, La Halacha, that Chametz is Assur B'Hanaa, Sharnishkal is Assur B'Hanaa, and the rest aren't. So what is the nafkamina La Halacha between the way Rabbi Vohu learns it and the way Chizkiah learns it? What's the difference if you hold that every achila means Isser Hana, or if only when it says Lo Yachel? At the end of the day, everything is still the same. So one of the answers the Gemara is going to offer, and that's why I brought it up now, is that the Oisai of the Kelef Tzlich and Oisai, that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Gemara wanted to use to teach you that wherever it says Achila, it means Isser Hana, and Chizkiah and Reb Meir would use that Oisai to teach you something else. They would use the Oisai to teach you that Chulun Shenishchatu Ba'azara is Assur B'Hanaa. At the end of the day, that's going to be the Machlokes. It's Chulun Shenishchatu Ba'azara, Mutter B'Hanaa, Midaraisa, and only Assur Midarbanan, or is it Assur B'Hanaa Midaraisa? Because really, at the end of the day, the only nafkamina between all these sudden is what to do with the extra word Oisai that exists by Treifa. You use Oisai to tell you that anytime it says Lo Yochel, it's Assur B'Hanaa. Dafka Treifa is Mutter B'Hanaa, but everywhere else where it says Lo Yochel, it's Assur B'Hanaa. Or does Oisai tell you something completely different, that Chulun Shenishchatu B'Azara is Assur B'Hanaa Midaraisa? So that's how the sugya started, and that's how the sugya is going to sort of come back around. So let's have a look at the next question that the Gemara asks from. Rabbi Vohu said that anytime it says a lashon of an Isser Achila, it automatically means that it's Assur B'Hanaa. But Truma, to Rachmana Omar, the Torah says regarding Truma, V'chol Zor Lo Yochel. V'chol Zor Lo Yochel Kodesh. The Zor may not eat Truma. So that should by default mean that a Zor may not even have Hana from Truma. Which not yet we learned. Ma'arvin l'nazir b'yayin. If you're making Erev Tchumen, so this takes us back to last Masechta. You want to set up an Erev Tchumen, so you put some meals 2,000 amas away from your city, so that you can walk there on Shabbos, and then another 2,000 amas past there. So you're allowed to use wine for a nazir, even though a nazir cannot drink wine. Ul Yisrael b'Truma, and in Yisrael you can use Truma. So it must be that you're allowed to have Hana from it. Now you might ask me, what good is it if I could have Hana? The whole purpose of the Erev Tchumen is to allow me to eat from it, and that's why I'm kavei makom there, because I can eat from it. So Rashi explains the reason why it would be good, v'chein Yisrael b'Truma, the boy mitchell alei. You could be chayzer on the Truma, and you could say the Truma's toss and the Truma. You can go to the rabbi and you could tell the rabbi, when I made this Truma, it was a mistake. I didn't mean to. And then v'hadur lativa, then it would become back tevel again. V'hadur mafresh shalom minova, and then technically during Bein Hashmoshes, where being mafresh trumas and ma'ishus is only an issue Rabbanon, you're allowed to do a shavus, you're allowed to do isurim Rabbanon during Bein Hashmoshes, because the Rabbanon were not goizer any isur Rabbanon during Bein Hashmoshes. So technically, you could make it a new truma Bein Hashmoshes, and therefore Bein Hashmoshes, the Erev is chal, and once it's chal Bein Hashmoshes, your Erev Tchumen works for the whole Shabbos. And the same thing would be by Naziris. So Frek Gemara, at the end of the day, you're still having Hana from it. So we solved the problem of Achila, because you could be shoyal, but you're still having Hana from Truma on Shabbos because it's being your Erev. So Amar Papa, Shiny Hosam, the Amar Kra, Truma Aschem. When it talks about Truma, and this is referring to the Truma of the Trumas Maisha that the Levi gives, but it says v'nechshav lachem trumaschem kedagin min agari nucha min Yaakov, meaning the truma that you're going to give Levim is just like the truma of Trumas Rishon that the Yisrael gives. But trumaschem has this connotation that it belongs to you, shalachem tehei, to teach you that by truma, although there's an isser for Yisrael to eat truma, Yisrael may have a no from truma. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Zok the Gemara ve'edich. What do you learn? What's the halacha? How do you use the word trumascha? And what does it teach you if you learn like Rabbi Vo? If you learn like Chizkiah, that most lashon achilas do not include isser and all, only lo yeyachel. So the lo yeyachel of truma would not include isser and all. So why did the Torah use the word trumaschem? Zok Rabbi Vo, Zok Chizkiah, trumaschem l'chol Yisrael kamar. You cannot really be medayik from trumaschem to teach you anything. That's the way the Torah speaks. Trumaschem of all of Klaishol. It's the normal way that the Torah speaks. Frektum of Arinozir, Rechmona Amar, Mechartzanim Vadzad Loyochel. A Nazir may not eat any part of a grape. With none. Ma'arvin le-Nazir b'yayin. Just like the same brayta that we quoted a moment ago. So how could the Nazir have hanoah from the wine by using it as an erev if a Nazir is Assur B'Hanaa on wine, on any grape products? Amar Razutra, Shani Hasam, Damakra Nizroi, Shalo Yehe. Again, there's a special pasuk, there's a special word by Nazir to tell us that a Nazir may have hanoah from wine products, although he cannot eat it. Vashi Amar, there's another place by Nazir where we know that he's allowed to have hanoah from the things that he's prohibited from eating. Because it says, Kodosh Yeh Gedel Peras HaRoshai. The Nazir cuts his hair at the end of his Naziris, and they burn that hair. And that hair is Assur B'Hanaa. So we make a deal. Giduloi Kodosh, his hair is Kodosh and Assur B'Hanaa. Ve'in davar acher Kodosh. But anything else involved in his Naziris, such as the wine and the grapes, that would not be Assur B'Hanaa. Frekti Gemara, Midi ve'in davar acher ksiv. Just because it says that his hair is Kodosh, there's no word or miyat that would indicate to exclude anything else being Assur B'Hanaa. So how do you see from there that wine products are Assur B'Hanaa to a Nazir? In fact, you don't. The only way we know that wine products are not Assur B'Hanaa to a Nazir is because it says Nizroi, which indicates that it's his, meaning he may have enough from wine products. He's just not allowed to drink them or eat them, and therefore he can use wine products for his Erev Tchum. Frankly, very chodosh. We know that halacha is that on the second day of Pesach, the korban ha'omer is brought in the Beis HaMikdash, which represents the first wheat from the crop that grew the previous winter, and you're not allowed to eat any of the crop that was grown in the previous winter until that korban is brought. We wait till the end of the day. So we wait till the end of the first day, to the end of the second day of Yom Tov to be able to eat Chadash. But in the times of the Gemara, in times of the Beis HaMikdash, when they had a korban, they had to wait till the korban was brought. So very Chadash, Rechmon Amar, Lechem v'koli v'karmel, lo yisaychlu, ad etzem hayom hazeh. One may not eat it. So again, according to Rabbi Vo, the word lo yisaychlu would indicate Isser Anah, which means you shouldn't be able to have Anah from the new product. Never mind, you're not allowed to eat Chadash, you're not even allowed to have Anah from Chadash. With none yet we learned, Koitzer l'shachas, you're allowed to cut down wheat that's not fully grown. Umachal behema, and you can also take wheat that's fully grown, rip it out rather than cut it properly, and serve it to your behema. So you see clearly that you're allowed to have Hanoah from Chadash. Yet it says lo yisaychlu, and according to Rabbi Vo, that should mean Isra Hanoah. Again, we have an exclusion. Amar Shmaya Shani Hasam Damarkra Kitzer Chem. Kitzer Chem Shalachem Yeh. The Torah used the word Kitzer Chem to tell you that although you can't eat it, you are allowed to have Hanoah from it. The Idich. And what would Chizkiah hold, who learns that Lo Seichel does not automatically include an Isra Hanoah? Why did the Torah need to use the word Kitzer Chem when it was talking about the Chodosh wheat? Again, you can't be medayik anything from Ketzirchem, that's how the Torah expresses itself normally. Correct the Gemara. We know it's also to eat shrotzim. We're not allowed to eat insects. And the Torah says, I believe I lost the place. Oh, here it is. Let's have a look at the pasuk itself. So this is going to be a kasha both on Rabbi Vo and Chizkiah. Because Chizkiah told us that when it says lo yeyachel, that automatically means an Isser Hana. According to Rabbi Vo, any lashon of Isser Achila means an Isser Hana. So it says lo yeyachel by shrotzim, which would indicate that there's an Isser Hana on shrotzim. With none, nevertheless, we learned in the Brisa. People who trap chayes, oifos, and dogim, shenizdamnu lahem minim tameim. So they're not looking to trap minim tameim. You're not allowed to trap minim tameim. You're not allowed to do schayra with nevelos and treifas. But they put out their nets to capture kosher products, and treifa products got caught in their web. Like Rashi shenizdamnu, dafka shenizdamnu. We don't force them to be mafbid. You're not allowed to do business. But it happened. They caught it in their net. So the lacha is they're allowed to sell. They're allowed to sell that those isurim to goyim. So you see clearly that you're allowed to have a noah. You're allowed to sell them. So tomorrow again, Shani Hashem Damakra Lachem. Shalachem Yehei. Take tomorrow Ihachi. If it says Lachem, Shalachem Yehei, that these shkotzim and shrotzim are mutter b'hanoah, afilu lechatchila nami. So why can't you lechatchila capture non-kosher animals and sell them and use them for trade? So tomorrow Shani Hacha, the Amar Krayiyu, they must remain in their state of Isser of Yasan Yu. So it's very interesting over here. So we have contradictory mashmois in the pasuk itself. We have one pasuk that says lachem, they should be yours, meaning you're allowed to have enough of them. You have another pasuk that says you should not be able to have enough of them. So therefore we're in the middle sort of. You're not allowed to go after them on purpose, but if they ended up in your hands, then you're allowed to sell them and have enough of them. Now, basically, according to Rabbi Vo, no matter how the Torah would express an Isser Achila, it would automatically include an Isser Hana. So the Torah had no choice to throw in the words Lachem and the words Yiyu. But according to Chizkiah, where it's only the word Ye'achel that means an Isser Hana, but any other expression of Isser Achila would not have included an Isser Hana. Why did the Torah use the word Lo Ye'achel by Shrotzim, and then Umayshi Lachem L'Masharia, and then have to add in another word of Lachem to tell us that we don't really mean Isser Hana? Lo Lichtoi B'Chmona Lo Ye'achel, V'Lo Boy Lachem. It should have said Lo Ye'achel, and then it wouldn't have needed Lachem, and we would have known that it's only an Isser Achila.
According to that shita, even the Assur B'Hanaa, it's not Assur B'Hanaa, but even that's qualified, isn't it? Didn't you just say you're not allowed to do business with them?
So you're saying, according to Chizkiah, you needed two Lashonis to tell you that you're not allowed to do it L'Chatchila, but if you had it in your net, with the Evid, you're allowed to have enough of it.
Yeah, and we don't even paskin like that, do we? I mean,
but I want to get the Toshas. We're going to get the Psak Halacha soon. But according to Chizkiah, it still could have skipped out Lachem. It could have said the regular Lashon of Isser Achila, and it could have said the word Yiyu. Yiyu wouldn't say it's Assur B'Hanaa, but Yiyu would tell us that you have to be somewhat reserved with it, meaning that you would not be allowed to go after them, to capture them L'Chatchila.
Or even do business with them. Even if you didn't capture them, you couldn't buy the skins necessarily, or the furs, Yiyu is very vague. Yiyu just says that there's some issue, there's some restriction. What exactly the restriction is, and how exactly to evaluate that restriction, that becomes subject to a lot of interpretation, which is where the discrepancy
And the controversy comes from as to what you're allowed to do, because this was relevant to a big shaila. Nowadays, if I'm not mistaken, when they shecht in the shlachtos, they're shechting goyish animals. And the animals that are kosher, they buy the front half from the slaughterhouse. But in the olden days, they shechted an animal that was owned by a Jew. And then, if it came out being a treifa, they sold it to the goy. So they were actively having hana from the treifa. So there was a lot of controversy amongst the poskim how this would be able to be mutter. So
Well,
I want to entice this, and then we'll
okay.
get into that.
Just a comment. You wouldn't be allowed to buy shoes if you were.
So Tosfos will take care of that. Tosfos will take care of it. Tosfos makes a big distinction between food products and other products. So we'll see that shortly. But now the Gemara comes out with a bombshell of an idea. Until now, and the way I introduced today, was Chizkiah learns that since it says lo yeyachel, that is a mashmois of an Israel. And Rashi even told us over there at the beginning of the sugya, why is lo yeyachel mashma Israel? Because it's mashma, you shouldn't come to eat anything, which means any anah that you would have, any financial benefit that you would have from chametz, if you can use it to purchase food, that also is like an achila. Which means independent of anything, we know that lo yeyachel, from its very meaning, includes the Israel. Now the Gemara is backing off of that. The Gemara is saying, no, we actually, even Chizkiah needed a pasuk to prove his point that lo yeyachel includes the Israel. And where is that pasuk? Zok Gemara ula Chizkiah lamali lemichtav lo yeyachel umaisi lachem lemasharya lo lichtav rachmana lo yeyachel v'lo boy lachem. According to Chizkiah, it could have avoided the word lo yeyachel, could have said lo yeyachel, and then it did not say lachem. Amar Chizkiah taima di di nami mehacha. Where do I know that lo yeyachel means a Israel? I know it from Shrotzim, because I think to myself, why did the Torah throw in the word lachem? The Torah could have used the word lo yeyachel. Elamai, it must be that the word lo yeyachel has a connotation of Israel, and that's why the Torah says lachem. But everywhere else where it says lo yeyachel, if there is no indication that it's Assur B'Hanaa, in fact, lo yeyachel would mean that it's Assur B'Hanaa. So now let's get into this shaila of doing business with nevelos and treifas. So let's see what Tosfos says. Omrka Yu Bav Yasan Yu. How could you be a broker or buy and sell horses? Everybody buys and sells horses. You know, you'd never be able to buy a Ford. So how could you buy any animal that's not kosher? Or like David asked, how could you buy shoes or furs or anything that comes from a non-kosher animal? Our sugi that says that there's an Isser Hana to have from Shrotzim, that's only referring to edibles, but using it for other reasons, there's no Isser at all to do commerce in Isurim. So you see, the main purpose of a chamor and a gomel are not to eat. The main purpose of why they're raised is to use them for work or for other purposes. And there's no isser for that. In Taimar, Ta'amina b'meruba, also li Yisrael agadol chazerim, teipaklei midaraisa also. We should be able to learn from here that it's also midaraisa. We have a pasuk of Yiyu, which we also to raise chazerim. The Shleimer, the nafkamina lemekam ba'or. The only when it says that it's also midaraisa, when the Gemara says over there that it's also midaraisa, it just means there's an or on it, but not necessarily. Well, the problem is, I guess over here we already see that there's a deraisa on it. So what is it? What does the Gemara mean to say deraisa over there? The Gemara means to say there's also an or on it. Inami hadu also midaraisa, or you could say that you say over here it's also midaraisa is hanuli staker the limkor lenachri lecha. It's only if the reason why you're doing business with this is because it's going to be a food product. You're selling it to the guy as a food product. But if you're handling in these products because you're going to use the animal derivatives for other purposes other than eating, then from our Gemara you don't see that there's any issue there. or you're using it for its oils, but you're not using it primarily for its food. But maybe in the Gemara Meruba that says it's Assur even if it's not being used to eat. So in our Gemara we know it's already Daraisa. The added Isser that the Gemara in Meruba is talking about might be for things that wouldn't be included in our Isser, such as if you're using the pig products for non-edibles. Or maybe it means that you didn't actually go after the pig; it just popped in by you. Where from our sugya that would be mutter, because enough will be Yerusha ain't lagadlin, but by pigs it's even worse. The Gemara says over there that you can't have even when our sugya does allow it. There's a machlokes actually in the Achronim if the Isser to do business with dvarim that are Assur B'Achila, if it's a deraisa or a drabanan. There are those who learn that we have the contradictory mashmoyis of lochem and yiyu in the Parsha of Shratim, which leaves a vague opening. How do you decide what you're allowed and what you're not allowed? So the Torah left it to the Chachamim to decide what's allowed and what's not allowed. There are those who hold the whole Isser is only midrabanan, and because of this shaila, there's a lot of talk in the Achronim about how we dispose of the non-kosher animals or the back of the animal that has chaylev that we normally don't use. How could we properly dispose of them? But it seems like they make a chilek between shkotzim and ramoshim, which are a bigger Isser. They're Assur by their essence is Assur, even when they're not checked, versus our animals that if they become a treifa, it happened to become a treifa. It had a problem in its lung or something, or if it's an avela, because the shechita wasn't good. There's a makom to be lenient by such items when it comes to doing business with them, versus items that are Assur minei obey from the beginning, like the behemoth tameis. And then we have Toshis as far that if your commerce with them is not primarily for the purposes of eating, today the derivatives that we have from animals are way more than just what we eat them, then there's also a makom to be made. Zok the Gemara weiter. Zok the Gemara as follows. Barei Chametz. What about Chametz? The Rechman Omar, Lo Yeyachal Chametz, and both Chizkiah and both Ravahu learned that it's Assur B'Hanaa. The Tanya Rabbi Yosy Glili, Rabbi Yosy Glili is a Tana who argues with the establishment, and he says, Tamal Atzmacha, hey, Chametz Assur B'Hanaa, Kol Shiva. Rabbi Yosy Glili learns that Chametz is not Assur B'Hanaa. Rabbi Yosy Glili is the Shita who holds that Chametz is not Assur B'Hanaa. So how could Rabbi Yosy Glili get away without holding the Chametz is Assur B'Hanaa if you have a Bavo's Shita that ever lo yochal mitzis ranah? You have Chizkiyahu Shita that lo yochal mitzis ranah. How does Rabbi Yosy Glili stem with them? So tomorrow shani hasam to amakra v'lo yirah lecha sa'ar, and we learn from the word lecha that shalacha yehei. So Rabbi Yosy also agrees to Rabbi Vo. Technically, the Tana he can argue, but Rabbi Yosy also agrees to Rabbi Vo's mahalach and to Chizkiya's mahalach, but he holds there's a special limud, there's a special word by Chametz as well, indicating that there's an Isser, that it's mutter b'Hanaa. V'Rabbanan, what about us establishment who learned that there is an Isser Hanaa on Chametz Pesach? What do we do with the Lacha? So we had the Gemara read earlier, Shalcha yateraya, aval ateraya, shalacherem v'shal gavoya. You're only not allowed, you're only over by your rabbi, you must have your own Chametz, but you're not over on someone else's Chametz. The idich, and what about Rabbi Yosy Glili? How does he know that Chametz is not over by your own? Shrei lecha ksivi, because it says lecha twice in the pasuk, and Rashi tells us it actually says it 3 times, twice by Sa'or and 1 by Chametz. The idich, chad b'nochi shekibashtoi, which we had this earlier in the first parak as well. You need one pasuk to tell you that anochi that you control, you're allowed to have his Chametz. Chad b'nochi shelekibashtoi. And we have another pasuk to tell you that even a nachi who you didn't capture, that you're allowed to have his chametz as well. And the Gemara over there explains why you need to super preach. And what about Rabbi Yosy Glili? How is he going to know this halach as well? So he also it actually says lecha 3 times. So we have one to learn that even a nachi shekibashtoi, his chametz is mutter by you. We have one to tell you that ataroya shalacherim shaldevoya. And the third one, according to Rabbi Yosy will tell you that Chametz is not Assur B'Hanaa. What about us who hold that Chametz is Assur B'Hanaa? What are we going to do with that third lacha? Since it says lacha, one of the lachas by Chametz, we need a special lacha for Chametz as well, because you wouldn't know the Isser of Bal Yirah Bal Yimatzeh. You wouldn't know that it applies to Chametz if it only said it by Sa'ar, and you wouldn't know that it applies to Sa'ar if it only said it by Chametz. Why is that? Utzrichi. You need them both. And Rashi explains why you need them both. Sa'ar is a much deeper Chametz. It's very Chametzic. It's like yeast. So if I would only know that there's an Isser Bal Yirah Bal Yimatzeh and Sa'ar, I might not know that there's an Isser Bal Yirah and Bal Yimatzeh on regular Chametz. On the flip side, Sa'ar cannot be eaten. You can't eat yeast. Chametz you can eat. So if it would have only said, if the Torah would have only said that there's an Isser Bal Yirah and Bal Yimatzeh on Chametz, I might not have known that there's also an Isser Bal Yirah and Bal Yimatzeh and Sa'ar. That's why the Torah needs to specifically say the La Yirah Lecha by Chametz and La Yirah Lecha by Sa'ar. Zok the Gemara, Lema Kitanoi. This shaila as to whether or not a standard lotion of Isser Achila automatically includes an Isser Hanah. Let's say that this is dependent in a machlokes tonight, because it says as follows: Yaseh l'chol malach. Let's see the pasuk inside. The chelev nevela, the chelev treifa. So we're talking about the chelev of a nevela or treifa. Yaseh l'chol malach. It will be mutar b'hanah. V'achar lo yishaychlu, but don't eat it. So the Gemara directions as follows: Ma talmud loymar l'chol malach. Why does it say that you can use it l'chol malach? You might think we're talking about chelev. Chelev normally you're not allowed to use. We don't need chelev. It's reserved for dvarim kachim, for the mizbeach. So you might think that when the Torah says that the chelev of an avela you're allowed to use, you might think you're only allowed to use a l'melachas gavoya. For instance, in the Beis Hamikdash, let's say they needed to create some type of bag made out of leather, and you need oil to smear that leather with to prepare that leather. So there, Rashi says, there you might be allowed to use it, because you're still using the chelev for something related to the Beis Hamikdash. But l'melachas hedyet yasser. You might think if you want to use chelev as an oil, as a fat, for some product, not an eating product, you might think that you'd be allowed to use. You might think you would not be allowed to use it. Talmud lomer l'chol malacha. So it says that yasser l'chol malacha. Not only is it mutar to be used for kachim, for the Beis Hamikdash, this chelev is also allowed to be used for your own personal benefit. That's Rabbi Yosy Aglili's position. I would have thought, let's think about it. A nevela is tameh. Yet the Torah here is excluding the chelev of the nevela and saying even though the rest of the body, the rest of the meat of a nevela is tameh, the chelev of this nevela is not tameh. So I would have thought, for what may I use the chelev of a nevela, even though the nevela that it's coming from is tameh, I can use it l'melachas hedyet, because melachas hedyet is not a problem with tameh. But the melachas gavoya is tameh. Maybe I shouldn't be able to use it for kachim, for the Beis Hamikdash, because it's coming from an nevela and it should be tameh. So you see here that Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yosy are polar opposites. Rabbi Yosy assumes that it should be mutar to be used in the Beis Hamikdash, and you need a pasuk to tell you that you're allowed to use it l'hedyet. Rabbi Akiva comes from the opposite side, and he says, no, it's much more mistaber by default to say that I can use this fat, which is coming from an nevela that's tameh, for hedyet. There's no problem of being metame chulim, but maybe I shouldn't be able to use this fat for inyane gavoya, for something in the Beis Hamikdash. So that's why you have the pasuk. Rabbi Yosy Aglili, l'tumah l'tayr lo yitzricha. Rabbi Yosy Aglili, you have to ask him, how are you so sure that there shouldn't be a problem of tumah when you're using this chelev in the Beis Hamikdash? So Rabbi Yosy Aglili, that's not an issue at all. That's not something that I need any pasuk to teach me anything about. L'tumah l'tayr lo yitzricha. Ki yitzricha l'isser v'heter. I only need the pasuk as a chiddush to tell you that it's mutar b'hanah, that you're allowed to have hanah from the chelev and you're allowed to use it even for your personal use. Rabbi Akiva, it's a vedel tzarich kra. I would never have a havamina that this chaylev would be Assur B'Hanaa. So if I have a chiddush in the pasuk, ki yitzchakra l'tumah l'tayra, it must be that the Torah is trying to tell you a chiddush about tumah l'tayra, that even though you're using it for Dorim Kachim, and this chaylev came from an avela, which is normally tamei, chaylev is excluded from the tumah of an avela. The Zok to Gemara, my love, it would make sense to say that the question is by default, do you assume that chaylev, which it says lo yoichalan, do you assume that it would be Assur B'Hanaa? If Yosy Savar lo soichlu mashma bein isur achila bein isur hanah, if Yosy synchronizes perfectly with Rabbi Vo, who says that by default the isur achila and chaylev automatically includes the isur hanah, and therefore you need a pasuk to say that you're allowed to have hanah from it. The chiyas akra l'mesharya l'levela b'hanah hudasa. So it's in the vela that the isur lo soichel. There's a pasuk that says you're not allowed in the vela. And the chiddush of the pasuk here is by the chaylev, you're allowed to have enough from it, and that's why Rabbi Yoshi's position was it's pashut that it could be used for the Beis Hamikdash. How do you know that you can even use the chaylev of the vela for a dover tahor, for a dover chulin? But from Kibbutz over Isra Achila Mashma, Isra Hanah Mashma. I would have never thought that there's any Isra Hanah at all on the vela. So if I need a pasuk to tell me a chiddush, it would only be regarding tumah tahira. The pasuk is only for tumah tahira, meaning that normally an avela is tamei. If you have a pasuk to tell you a chiddush that the chaylev is completely tar, and you'd even be allowed to use it for kalim of the Beis Hamikdash. So now you have what seemingly is machlokes between Rabbi Yosy Aglili and Rabbi Kiva as to whether or not the default lashon of Isra Achila also means an Isra Hanah. So that's not how we would understand the machlokes. The chul amaloi soichlu mashma. Everybody would agree that L'Saychlu means both Isra Achila as well as Isra Hanah. And this is the machlokes between Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Yosy savar kishahutra nevela he hutra, when the Torah was matter and nevela to have a no from, right? The Torah said you're allowed to sell the nevela to a goy. What did the Torah mean to be matter? Itself, the nevela. But chelba v'gida lo hutru. The Torah never said the other associated components of the nevela was mutter, just the meat of the nevela. Therefore, the chiyitzrich kra leheter hanah udasa. So now that I have a pasuk that talks about chaylev nevela being mutter, it must be that the Torah is being matter at b'hanah. Rabbi Kiva savar kishahutru nevela chelba v'gida nami hutru. When the Torah said a nevela is mutter to have an offram, it meant all of the edible portions of the nevela. So automatically I know minei ubei from the nevela that you're allowed to have a noah from any part of the nevela. So if I have a special pasuk that's talking about a heter by the chaylev of the nevela, the tumah v'tayra, the pasuk could only be telling you a chiddush in tumah v'tayra because I already know that it's mutter b'hanah. Rabbi Yosy Aglili, according to Rabbi Yosy Aglili, ashkechan chaylev d'shoyer rachmana b'hanah. We see a pasuk here that we just discussed that the Torah specifically allows the chaylev of a nevela, you're allowed to have enough from it. Normally a nevela you cannot have enough from, but you have over here a special exclusion for the chaylev of the nevela. Elagid, name it Assur. How do you know that the gid anasha of a nevela would be mutter b'hanah? It should be Assur B'Hanaa. It should be included in the layochel of the nevela. And although we have special limudim to tell us that the meat of the nevela you're allowed to have enough from, and the chaylev of the nevela you're allowed to have enough from, but we don't have a pasuk talking about the gid of the nevela. So the gid of the nevela should fall to the default that it's Assur B'Hanaa. So come on, Ibai say mahachanami to Assur. Maybe Rabbi Yosy holds taka that is Assur B'Hanaa. We had a Tana at the beginning that said at the beginning of the parak, Rabbi Shimon, who said that a gid anah is Assur, a gid anasha is in fact Assur B'Hanaa. Ibai say ma'isli b'kal v'chaymer. He would know that a gid anasha is mutter b'hanah from a kal v'chaymer. Uma chaylev, so anush karis mutter b'hanah, ma de chaylev, which is an isur karis on chaylev if you eat it. Yet we have a pasuk that says it's mutter b'hanah. Gid she'enei anush karis. The only issue of eating a gid is Allah, like Koshkin, surely it should be mutter b'hanah. Rab Shimon the Assur, we know Rab Shimon holds that a gid anasha is Assur B'Hanah. What does he do with this kal v'chomer? Because Rab Shimon also agrees that the chaylev of a nevela is mutter b'hanah, so why don't you have a kal v'chomer to gid? You can't bring me a raya from chaylev, because chaylev has a kal to it. That chaylev is completely mutter by a chaya. Tomer begid shlei hutter mechlala it's a chaya. While gid anasha has a chumrah over chaylev, that the gid anasha of a chaya is also Assur. So what's Rabbi Yosy Haglili going to do with this kasha to his kavachimer? He'll answer, behema kamrina, the behema mios lo yishturi. I'm talking about behema. By behema, you don't find ever that chelav would be mutter. So by behema, chelav is more chomer than gid. And if the Torah was mater chelav b'hana, surely a gid hanasha would also be mutter b'hana. Michti. So now the Gemara takes inventory of what we've learned. We ended up asking all these kashas about lo yoichal, and we have exclusions in all the different cases to say that over here there's an exclusion why it's mutter b'hana. So therefore, at the end of the day, Chizkiah, who learns the Isser Hana by Chametz Pesach, but from lo yachel, Rabbi Vo, who says that every case where it says lo yoichel means Isser Hana, except for all the many exceptions, for my plea, where is the machlokes? So to Gemara, the Chametz Pesach v'aliba the Rabbanon. Their machlokes is by Chametz Pesach and according to the Rabbanon, which means Rabbi Yosy clearly held that Chametz Pesach is mutter b'hana. So for sure they're not talking about that. They're talking about the Rabbanon. The machlokes is how to understand why Chametz Pesach is Assur B'Hanaa, according to the Rabbanon, who in fact hold that Chametz Pesach is Assur B'Hanaa. And the machlokes is, do you learn it from the lo yachel, or is it because lo yachel automatically means Isser Hana? That's one case where they're arguing. And b'shar haniskal v'liba the divrei hakol. There's also a machlokes where they know that shar haniskal is Assur B'Hanaa. Is it from the lo yachel, or is it from the Baal Hashana? So Zok the Gemara, Chizkiah navikli milo yachel. Chizkiah learns it from the words lo yachel. Bavo navikli minavela. So for the Gemara, Michti, Bein Lamar, Assur B'Hanaa. Sai according to Chizkiah, Sai according to Rabbi Vo, Shar Nishkol is Assur B'Hanaa, and Chametz is Assur B'Hanaa, and all the other cases are not Assur B'Hanaa. So Ma'abinai. So what's the nafkamina lahalacha between Chizkiah and Rabbi Vo? They have a different route, but they're going exactly to the same destination. Is there anywhere where they differ? So the whole nafkamina will be, what is the halacha according to Rabbi Yehuda by chulon shenishchatu b'azara? We just all the way at the beginning of the sugya, the Gemara had a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda as to what special lesson we have in the parsha of Nevela from the fact that the Torah says sell it to a goy or give it to a ger. Rabbi Yehuda said devarim kiksavam. It's telling you a special halacha that you only allowed to sell to a goy or give it to a ger. So therefore, from Nevela, you wouldn't be able to learn that any lo yoichal includes an Isser Hana. So where did Rabbi Yehuda get it from? Rabbi Yehuda got it from Lakelav Tashlichon Oisai by Treifa, and we learned that but Treifa is mutter b'hana, but all other places where it says lo yoichal, it's going to be Assur B'Hanaa. That's what Rabbi Yehuda learned. Now let's think about this. Chizkiah and Rabbi Vo or Rabbi Meir would argue because they don't need that word oisai. So they use the word oisai to teach you that chulun shenishchutu ba'azara is Assur B'Hanaa even midaraisa, and that would be the whole nafkamina. Chizkiah savar lo yachel l'mutehani. The lo yachel tells you that only those things are Assur B'Hanaa, but all the other places where it doesn't say lo yachel in the Torah is muter b'Hanaa, and oisai, which we don't need to teach us about Isser Hana, l'mutei chulun shenishchatu ba'azara. It's telling you that chulun shenishchatu ba'azara is a raisa. But Rabbi Vo, according to the way he learned Rabbi Yehuda, so for oisai l'mutehani, he would need the word oisai by treifa to tell you that everywhere else achila is Assur B'Hanaa, and chulun shenishchatu ba'azara lav daraisa ninu. So at the end of the day, the whole difference between Chizkiah and Rabbi Vo is in Rabbi Yehuda. In Rabbi Yehuda Shita, it's chulun shenishchatu b'azara deraisa or lav deraisa. Zok the Gemara. Yosy v'Hanaa Rabban Chamed Rabbi Shmuel by Nachmeni. Someone who was sitting in front of Rabbi Shmuel by Nachmeni, the Yosef v'Ka'amar b'Shmed Rabbi Shmuel ben Levi, and he asked that question, an innocent question. Minayin l'chol yisurin shebetorah yichehechi de'asurin b'achila hachanami asurin b'hana u'mayniu chametz b'Pesach v'shar niskal. How do you know that Chametz Pesach is Assur B'Hanaa and Shar Niskal is Assur B'Hanaa? So Shmuel ben Achmeni says, you don't know? We just went through this whole sugya. Minayin, typically, Milo Yoichal lo yachel. Typically, lo yachel, which is Chizkiya Shita, that lo yachel is mashma Israel. So he answered back, no, I disagree with Chizkiya. Lo yachel Israel achila mashmalei Israel no le mashmalei. So Rav Shmuel ben Nachmani said, okay, so you don't like Chizkiya's approach. What about the Ravo's approach? Typically, min nevela, and from nevela you learn that everywhere in the Torah where it uses a lashon of Israel achila, it automatically means Israel no. No, it's Tavalach Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar Dvarim kicks up on. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds there is no raya from the Vela. In fact, it's Tavalach Rabbi Yehuda. Typically, mehecha the nafkele the Rabbi Yehuda, which is milekelaf tashlich and oisai. Let him use the oisai by treifa to tell you that everywhere else where it says a lashon lo yoichal, it also means Israel. No. Gemara kasav chulun shenishchadu bazar deraisa. He holds chulun shenishchadu bazar deraisa. So you need oisai to teach you chulun shenishchadu bazar. So since he disagrees with every other shita that we looked until now as to how we know that there's an Israel no by Chametz, how does he know that? Minayin. So he has a fourth limud. Kol chatos asher yuva midama. It says if there's a chatos that its dam was supposed to be spritzed on the outside mizbeach, and mistakenly its dam was spritzed on the inside mizbeach, that's going to make the carbon puzzle. And it says on it, let's see the whole puzzle. It says, you should not be eaten by Eish Tisarei. So he asks the kasha, why did the pasuk have to say you burn it? We already know if you can't eat it, it's already certain it's got to be burned. I don't need it to teach me the halacha that the dam chatas achitzoni that you spritzed on the inside, that means you have to burn it. That was the case where by Moshe Rabbeinu, where they burned something and Moshe Rabbeinu protested. This is right after the Chanukas Abayis, the Chanukas HaMishkan. Doresh Moshe, Vinei Sarif, it was burnt. They burned it because they thought it was possible. So Moshe was upset at why they burned it. But you see there that you have to burn dam that was supposed to be spritzed on the outside Mizbeach. If it was spritzed on the inside Mizbeach, we already know it's got to be burned. So why do I need the pasuk over here to tell me that it has to be burned? So tomorrow, since I don't need it, the Ve'esh Tisaref to tell you the Honchatas Hashayuv Midama, because I already know it, so use that extra Ve'esh Tisaref to Neyu Ilyin L'chol Yisurin Shabbatayr will apply the Ve'esh Tisaref that's talking about a carbon chatas whose blood was spritzed in the wrong place. To Neyu Ilyin L'chol Yisurin Shabbatayr, let's apply it to all Yisurin in the Torah, wherever there's an Isur, you have to burn. You don't need this basically serve to tell you anywhere that's Assur B'Achila, because in all these places it already says La Yoichal. So therefore, what we'll do is we'll learn from here that any place in the Torah where it says you're not allowed to eat something, from the Be'esh Tisaref, by the Chatas Dam that was spritzed in the wrong place, we'll learn that all the places in the Torah where it says there's Isra Achila, that it automatically means Isra no. Fact the Gemara, Ima Kan B'Sreifa, Avkol Yisurin Shabbatar B'Sreifa. It says Be'esh Tisaref, and you want to learn from there to all the Isra Achila that there's an Isra no. Well, you should also learn that you have to burn it, and we don't know necessarily that every Isra no has to be burnt. Amarkra B'Kodesh Be'esh Tisaref, B'Kodesh B'Sreifa, Ben Kol Yisurin Shabbatar B'Sreifa. We have a special miyut that the mitzvah of Sreifa only applies to Kochim, but the Isra no will apply to all places where there's Isra Achila. So at the end of the day, we sort of have four different approaches to why Chametz for Pesach is Assur B'Hanaa. Either because every Lashon Achila is an Isra no, which is Rabbi Vo's Shita, or you have this last Shita that we learned over here from Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachmani, that from the Eish Tisaref you learn that wherever the Torah says an Isra Achila, it automatically means an Isra no. You have Rabbi Yehuda Shita, where it says by Treifa, Lakelav Tashlichun Oisai, only the Treifa is going to be Mutar B'Hanaa, but other Achilas will be Assur B'Hanaa. And then you have Rabbi Bo, who says Lo Yachel means an Isra no. I guess we can stop here. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Shkoyach.
Shkoyach.